Good evening and welcome to the Board of Selectmen's October 30th, 2019 meeting. I would like to bring to the audience's attention our new setup here. We're trying to professionalize these meetings and to improve the quality of sound. For those of you watching at home, we have a table set up in front of us, and going forward we will have guests sit at the table. There's a microphone there, and hopefully this improves the quality of our meetings to those of you drinking your wine and listening.
At least the audio portion.
Right. So are there any citizens' comments this evening? There being none, we will move to the first item of business, and that is the Carroll Community Center, next steps. Mr. Dwelly, I believe last meeting you had mentioned that it's been a while since the town of Dover has done a building project, and times have changed in the 10 years that we've embarked upon one of these projects. And you volunteered to put together, which I thought was great, a process flow so that not only do we as the board understand how this will unravel, but also all of the citizens that are interested in the project. I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So as you mentioned, I wanted to provide, after the affirmative vote at town meeting a few weeks ago about moving forward, 2 technically affirmative votes. Thank you, Selectman Springett. It's great to have you back. I mean that, nigga.
A little sarcasm.
No, never. That I wanted to put together an overview for the board on kind of what to expect, what you could expect, and what the community can expect moving forward as we undertake a building project here in the community based on the votes that we received at town meeting. So, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, I put together, in conjunction with our legal counsel, just a really quick overview of the state procurement regulations as it relates to building construction in the state, as well as a draft building charge that you could take a look at if the committee decides that they want to empower a building committee to kind of assist the community in making a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen on what the next direction is for the Carroll Community Center. Another thing that I wanted to do, and we did this down in Yarmouth, and I found it quite helpful when there were big, large projects like this, would oftentimes invite legal counsel to the meeting to be able to kind of help give a more in-depth overview of these processes. They have a lot of experience, particularly in the particular areas. We wanted to make sure that they'd come before so they could answer any questions and really give you an overview of the process. And so John has joined us here.
So he could be our first guest at the table. Right.
So he'll be the first one, and John's here to really kind of give you, based on his experience, he does a lot of procurement in his work, an overview of kind of what the process looks like, and again, answer any questions you may have this evening as we get underway.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for testing out our new setup.
Yeah, hopefully.
And it has no resemblance to the Spanish Inquisition, really, none whatsoever.
Yeah, no,
If you feel a shock in any way, just...
I don't see a rack in here or a pendulum or anything.
And we took the trapdoor key away from Chris, so you're good.
Did Chris circulate the outline that?
He did.
Yes, he did circulate that? Okay. So, this really applies to, and I guess for the first caveat is that, I have an understanding of the project on a conversational level, and I've sort of looked into it a little bit. I'm not familiar with the precise scope. I understand that you're at a stage where you know the site, you know the building, and it's a question of whether you're going to renovate or you're going to do a new construction. Is that right? Okay. And
excellent summary.
yeah, I mean, and so I'm not. That's sort of the level of my familiarity, and I know that there's been some
It's really
cost.
a question for the community, right?
Right.
We ask the community.
Sure, and but it's not going to. It's not at a phase where you have multiple sites, for example.
Right.
Correct.
That's correct.
Or it doesn't sound like you're too deep into cost feasibility. You have a general idea of what it's going to cost.
Idea,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay. And so the issues are, and I think that we've discussed these in some detail, is the need and timing for an owner's project manager, because the state bidding laws require an OPM for anything over $1.5 million, right? And when you do that, you have to hire the OPM before you actually contract with the architect or the designer for design services. So there's those 2 pieces, the timing of that. And then there's also the question whether and to what extent you might want to get a building committee or something approximating a building committee involved, and when, right?
Right.
Yep.
So the mandatory pieces are the OPM and the designer, right?
Correct, yep.
So, you know, if you're, my understanding is this is at a stage where there's really little in the way of feasibility to be done besides your sort of binary choice of renovation versus new construction.
I think that's right.
Right. And, you know, so just from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're ready to get it, and you probably should have a designer involved, which means you're going to have to get an OPM involved.
Yeah.
But you need the OPM involved
You need the
before
OPM
the
before the design,
design.
exactly.
Okay.
And the OPM is obviously a useful resource. I mean, it depends, you know, sometimes there's some resistance in getting them involved at a certain point because you're paying them, but they are a valuable resource. They help you scope, you know, they help with the actual planning and sort of programming stages and feasibility to the extent that you have feasibility left. And they help you scope, you know, the services that you're going to need for your designer, which is huge. So the designer selection piece, you being a local authority, you actually don't have to follow anything other than something qualifications based. You have a local set of guidelines, is my understanding, that has
Now, what
been
about for the OPM?
approved. So the OPM, there's no law on how the OPM has to be selected, other than being qualifications based. The state inspector general has, from time to time, issued written guidelines on what they recommend you should do. They recommend you should try to follow a process that resembles the state designer selection law for selecting architects. But the only legal requirement is that it's qualifications based. And so that just means it's not a hard bid where you get the lowest responsible bidder. Mm-hmm. It's a series of defined qualifications and levels of experience with certain kinds of projects. You then rate them, you know, usually by criterion. You have to narrow them down to three, at least three. And then typically you'd interview them. And then you'd make a recommendation. When I say you, it's whoever's been charged with that responsibility. It's the Board of Selectmen has the ultimate authority to retain them based on whoever recommends.
Right, okay.
Yep.
So do those interviews need to take place in a public meeting setting?
Yes.
Okay.
We have a committee that we assigned to, at the beginning of this process.
But not to do that. This is ultimately, you know, the committee brought us to where we are
Right.
today.
So-
Now this is a whole new,
Right.
a whole new slate.
So
That was the planning committee I saw.
Yeah,
Right.
There was something,
that-
planning
the
committee.
committee who made the presentation to town meeting on October 7th, effective, that was the end of that committee.
Right, they
Okay.
served their charge.
Right, mission accomplished.
Mission
Right.
accomplished.
Right.
Check the
Right.
box.
So now, based on what Chris has provided and you've talked about, you know, it seems to me our charge is to figure out, well, I'll say it for me anyway, the important thing is to move rapidly to the next phase. And from my perspective, knowing how long it takes to put a building committee together, based on my experience trying to put the original Carroll Community Center together, there were sort of two options in Chris's presentation, sort of in something called like you charge somebody like the town administrator, you may or may not have a small group of professionals help, called officials, and they would do sort of the OPM selection process. And it was interesting to me that because I've been struggling with sort of moving the project forward, moving the project forward rapidly and quickly, coming up with an OPM and designer, and then for me, I began to think of the building committee as a support structure for the OPM and designer and outreach. The important thing in the past, in the last project, was the outreach. And so if we can bifurcate that, move something along while we take the time to actually put together the building committee, because we'd want to publicize, ask people who want to volunteer, et cetera, as well as, sort of debate and decide what we think the composition should be. By doing that, we'd save the time to do that while moving the OPM designer thing forward.
And legally, you can absolutely do that. And, take it from somebody who has been on both sides. I've advised building committees, I've served on building committees. And you're absolutely right that installing a building committee, because everything has to be done under the open meeting law, in
Yeah.
addition to actually just wanting to get qualified people,
Yeah.
coming up with sort of the qualifications for those folks, interviewing them in open meetings, receiving, and all the posting timeframes of 2 weeks for everything.
Right.
It does take a long time.
Yep.
And it can be interesting in terms of the composition, and you want to get that right. So I think your instincts are right there. And I don't disagree with them. It's just sort of a judgment call for you all to make.
Yep.
And as far as the law goes, there's nothing that prohibits you from doing that. And I would also point out that your particular guidelines that you adopted, at least with respect to the designer selection process here, does not contemplate installing a building committee even for that. Now, that doesn't mean at all that you are precluded from doing so. You have a sort of inherent authority to delegate these processes to appropriate people within the town. But let's just say, for example, that you don't want the building committee to be in place, for these good reasons of, being expeditious, until after you've hired both the OPM and the architect, and maybe done some level of feasibility before you move into schematic design, which is the next sort of when the action starts to really happen, right? And by the way, I agree with you in terms of a building committee. There are different kinds of building committees. Okay, some towns have permanent building committees, and their charges tend to be more elaborate. There are building committees that are required by statute. For example, for the state building authority, when you get state funding to build a new school, and the statute's very specific about the composition, about the number, about what they have to do, about when they get involved. But generally speaking, the common thread is community outreach and being a liaison. And that's how I've always envisioned it. Having sat on a building committee, I've always thought that our charge, and in fact, I spent a lot of time trying to explain to people as I was dodging shrapnel all day long, that we were not policymakers, that we were here to listen and to consolidate town input and to make sure that every stakeholder was heard.
Yeah, voices were heard.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. And then you're a key conduit to the designer and to the construction team, and to make sure that everybody's.
Right, but the professionals are going to take that information and.
That's right.
With that, they're in the design.
Right.
It's, the building committees are not the professionals.
That's right. Except to the extent that you would almost always have at least 50% people who are qualified in sort of the
Yes.
construction trades, architecture or engineering or construction.
On the committee.
But that's really like having really good translators, right?
Right.
It's people who speak the language.
Yep.
And the fact is that when you're on the ground and the construction is started and you're dealing with change orders and design hiccups and things like that, it's important to have people with
We won't
expertise.
have any
But I'm sure this will be a perfect project. It'll be ahead of schedule.
Under
It'll
budget,
be under budget.
it'll be perfect, yes.
It'll be absolutely perfect, and
So
everybody
you
will
know
rave
how
about it.
special we are in the town of Dover.
Yeah. So there'll be no problems. But hypothetically,
Okay.
He knows Gretchen very well, right?
right. Hypothetically, that's where that value add is, and it's also important just for obvious sort of political reasons. I mean, people want to feel like they have a voice, and
Yes.
it's an important.
That's the most important.
Yeah, it's important. So, and for those reasons, much of this will be a judgment call that, for you to make. But there's certainly nothing in the procurement law that would prevent you from, for example, having Mr. Dwelly and, let's say, one or two town employees, like a facilities manager or, somebody who deals with purchasing, and perhaps they might also regularly consult with a particular stakeholder of the community center, perhaps an employee there, whoever heads the community center would be a good idea, to handle the procurement of the OPM. The OPM will then play a large role in retaining the designer. Okay? And at any point after that, you can, or at the same time, you can be qualifying a building committee.
Okay. I like the two tracks.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we're going to vote on any of this evening, but my initial reaction is this is an important project for us as a town and for us as a board. And I, at this juncture, and I haven't really given it a lot of thought, but I think that the board should be involved in the hiring of the OPM.
Directly or through the town?
Directly, and with the town administrator,
Yeah.
but similarly to what we did getting, finding the right recruiting
Yeah, yeah.
firm.
Well,
But
right,
that's
right.
just my initial thought.
I think that's
I could be
right.
persuaded the other way.
And I don't have to tell you that the board is, you are the executive authority in this town. And so sort of everybody else works by your delegated power anyway. So you can, ultimately, you will be making the decision. I think what Madam Chairman is saying here is that you want to be involved in the actual process of the substantive rating and qualifying and making the decision.
Right.
And that'll be, again,
At this juncture
Right.
in my decision-making.
Right. Well, normally the process contemplates if you have a committee or if you have, say, 3 people doing this, heading the process, they would go through the rating and the interviewing and the reviewing of the responses to the RFQs. Then they would make a written recommendation, submit all the materials to you, and, you vote yea or nay to accept the recommendation, and in doing so, you get to re-review everything that's already been done. That's sort of the minimal level of participation.
I think
that you
Robin is referring to we've just sort of implemented a different sort of practice where one of us actually sits on what we deem as sort of critical projects as either a representative or a member of the committee, and that seemed to work
Right, so that's.
reasonably well.
Right, so that's definitely, I envision one of us being on the building committee, but I took this a step further. And
Okay.
as I said, I haven't thought this through,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I thought just, and, let me think about it a little more, but my initial thought was, in hiring the OPM,
Mhm.
I would like the 4 of us and, the head of facilities to be a part of that interview process, so that we could feel comfortable, not just review a recommendation
Sure.
from somebody else.
May I ask a question, Madam Chair?
You certainly may.
So as it relates to procurement laws, so anytime I've ever put together a review committee, it's always been staff, and then the recommendation goes to the board, and the board votes it. Are there any preclusions to having an elected member and staff be a part of the evaluation committee? No? Okay, but if it's a majority of members, it would then have to be everything would have to be a posted meeting.
Okay, so then it would slow the process.
But it sounded like most of this had to be open meeting anyway.
So
Well, it's not an open meeting, the review process isn't necessarily an open.
No, you'll all be at home reviewing it while
Correct.
watching television or
Correct.
whatever else. But any conclusion or decision
Is has to
and
be-
deliberation
Yes, yes,
associated
yes.
will be in an open meeting.
That's correct. And all those materials are public record as well.
Right.
Correct. Correct. You'll be posting all of the responses to the RFQs on the website.
To me, meeting the person, looking them in the eye, them telling you what's written on paper,
It's way more.
is more important for me when it comes to making a
No,
decision.
for me, yeah, I
But
think that's-
there are 3 of us, so, and maybe it's just the finalists we bring in and interview that way.
Was that?
That's
is
typically
that
how it's
similar-
done.
Is that similar
Right,
to
so
what we
that
did?
might, because I don't want to slow things down,
Right.
and I
No, no,
understand.
right.
So, I have a very busy schedule, so I would be the person slowing everybody down.
You could do
so-
remote participation.
But that defeats the purpose of
No, no,
looking
video.
across at this person at the table.
We can use video, you can
Right.
see that person.
I would like to be sitting here looking at the
Okay.
person across the
No, I think that's really valid.
Usually
And
you
I'm
get
okay
your
with
top 3 and you
finalists.
drag them in.
That's
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
And you,
so that's that's my position, but we can
Okay.
talk about it a little bit more,
So it sounds like
because
you're,
I'm one of 3.
but you're like the most important one.
I know that. I'm sure you do.
You realize you said that out loud.
I said that out loud.
And on television.
Yeah, that's similar to, it's similar to the TA, the interim TA process. We
Right,
had some guidance, we interviewed people, we were
Right.
pretty directly involved in that, we thought it was really important.
right, and actually thinking back on that, I took the lead, so this way you could take the lead, you could bring the 3 back, and.
But also-
John and I sort of connived behind your back to make sure you
Yeah.
took the lead on that one.
But unlike the search process with bringing in the consultant for the search process, we're not bound by the lowest bidder
Right,
process.
right. So, no, I thought that's very, very
So
well
in your
said, you should consider.
experience, should the OPM have any input into the composition of the committee?
I think they can.
Okay.
And I think they should, and I don't think it'll be terribly surprising. And in fact, I think one place to look, you can look at DCAM, the Division of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance, the state head of capital projects. They issue a lot of guidelines on this stuff too, on what OPMs do and what you should expect of them in addition to what's also required of them under the public bidding laws. And the OPM is really the shepherd and agent, and they will help you with literally everything.
Well, that's why it's the critical hire for this project.
Yes, it is. And I will tell you that in my experience, you sort of have the usual suspects for different, scopes
projects,
of projects. And the key is to make sure that you don't do anything that reduces the usual suspects from the candidate pool, right? You want to make sure that you will get, sort of the best and brightest will be throwing their hat in the ring. And then obviously you weigh things like cost depending on, the needs of the project and the complexity of it. But, so you're absolutely right that the OPM is the most critical hire, because that's going to be your eyes and ears on the ground as well when after the construction starts. So, but yes, they will help you with absolutely everything from planning, and they are required to help you in the planning, which involves, scoping the design services, any feasibility that's left over, and I would think installing a building committee. But the building committee, it's always going, if I was going to recommend anything, I would say to keep it smaller rather than larger. I've seen building committees with 19 people on it.
And
And that's for a
reach
50
decisions?
to $60 million job, but it just, at the end of the day, there's probably 5 people who are truly invested and carry most of the weight anyway.
Last year, we went through a number of critical committees, and one of the first things we did was come to the mathematical conclusion that it could be no more than 7.
Yeah, I think that
in
sounds good.
one particular committee.
Yeah.
So, and that was the max.
Yep.
For lots of very well thought out reasons, but we've been through this process of committees a number of times in the past couple of years. Yeah. So,
And you're entitled to take sort of the qualifications criteria seriously. Words are one thing, but I've seen, people sort of just take whoever they can get, and, well-meaning, smart people may not necessarily be the best people for
Right.
this particular committee. So I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but, the beauty of this is you have the authority to carefully articulate and control the composition of your committee.
I think the composition of our committees has led directly to very favorable outcomes over the past couple of years. So we're very, very sensitive to it, and we appreciate the guidance and your.
Yeah. And just so you know, in Dover, as far as I know, Dover has a pretty solid reputation for doing things the right way. So I'm not suggesting that I've ever heard anything different than that. So I'm just telling you what you can do.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful.
Anything else?
No, but it would be helpful to get direction from the board on how you want to proceed, to authorize me to start to draft scope of work and requirements for an RFQ for an OPM. And then it would be good to get a decision from the board on whether or not you want 1, 2, or 3 members of the board involved throughout the entire selection process, or if you want us to include in the guidelines of the RFQ that the 3 finalists, as part of the review process, will come before the full board in an open meeting.
Yeah, we have a.
So I envisioned, and I just assumed, Bob, that you would continue. So speak now if you don't
I
want to.
started the last project with hair. Just so you know.
So, John, unless, I just assumed that Bob would continue taking
want it?
the lead, unless, okay.
Yeah.
So then,
I think that's a great idea. I think that could be the best
See how this
idea you've
happens?
had tonight.
so then,
So we,
so I think the best way to move forward would be for Bob to be the lead selectman, to work with you on the scope and the RFP, and to bring back the 3 finalists to the full board.
Great.
do you want more time to think about it?
I'm okay with that now.
Could always vote at the next meeting if you wanted to.
Right, we could do
Whatever you
it
guys
the
wanna do.
next meeting.
Well,
That's-
maybe we
that-
can sit down next couple of days and put something together and
Okay.
then bring it back to the
I
board on
mean-
the 7th.
Conceptually, John, do you have an issue with that?
No.
Right,
No.
so
I think
you
it's-
could come back and give us a more detailed framework.
Yeah, we'll talk, we'll put
Okay.
something together for next time. And it's only a week. I mean, we're meeting next,
Right.
was it next Thursday?
And then,
Wednesday, next
Right.
Wednesday.
and then we should also put together a framework for the composition and charge of the building committee.
Okay.
I'm not sure, you know,
No, that
this is.
changes.
Right.
Yeah, it changes. And we should think about advertising, right, for
Well, I think
volunteers, or
we
wanna do it
need
that
to
way?
advertise, we need to give citizens the opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to participate in it. And, you know, we should think about the skill sets
Right,
that we'll.
yes, qualifications,
qualifications, and see if we can recruit citizens with those qualifications
Yep.
that have the time to serve on the
Yep.
committee. And I think we need to make clear that that doesn't mean other stakeholders will be excluded from
Correct.
participating.
So we'll use a
So we'll
model
have a
similar.
core committee, and
Yep.
then we'll have,
Yep.
reach out to
Yeah.
Outreach,
stakeholders.
yes.
There are members, Ford in particular, of our building committee process who've had lots of recent experience in building public buildings. Minuteman was a tremendous outcome, so I think there's going to be I think there'll be a lot of interest in this process, and I think it's going to be incumbent upon us to weed through those suspects, as you refer to them.
Usual
There are
suspects,
The usual
usual
suspects.
suspects.
But I also think that because this is such a high priority and a high visibility project that we've been undertaking for the last several years.
20
that
years.
there's- 20 years. But really, for this board, in this iteration of it, it's really gone to the next level, and it's gotten to a point where the others have not. And I think primarily because of the energy and effort of the committee, of the work that we've done, and of the work that our facilities director and the people who we have in the town in place right now have done. So I want to make sure that they are sort of working and feel comfortable about our direction with this.
So I think, we have the next step, so we'll bring it back, and we'll be on the agenda for November 6th, and we can vote on it then.
See how deftly she delegated?
That was impressive. But I think you also touched on some important points to make, and when we usually work out the charge and to the extent that you want to communicate this in meetings. I mean, you're absolutely right that it's pretty routine to do, as you probably know, to do subcommittees with larger
Right.
citizen participation. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity for people to participate outside of just sitting, at the table with the committee, so.
Right. And the committee's going to be a long-term commitment. It's a multi-year commitment for those that are going to be the core members of the committee.
Yeah.
I like John's, it's going to get done under budget and under schedule, really quickly, perfectly.
In 6 months. you're gonna do
6 months.
it?
Under promise and over deliver. So it's always going to be a long slog, and it's going to take up a lot of time.
Under promise and over deliver, yeah.
But, yeah, so, and feel free to cheat, go on some other town websites who have permanent building committees. And they tend to have sort of robust websites and qualifications, mission statements and everything else. And it might give you a good starting point for the kinds of, obviously, try to find towns that have good track records and low litigation rates and things like that.
So I'm always
And
willing to borrow.
And I'm happy to help with that, Chris, too.
Okay.
So,
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I hope the audiovisual test was successful, too.
We'll
And
let
the
you know
buzzer
the
didn't work.
feedback.
The trap door.
Rick's giving you the thumbs up, so, yeah. Our producer says that you did a great job.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. It was very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too.
And good luck with this project.
Thank you.
It's going to go well, so.
I think this may not be the last time we see you.
Yeah.
But it'll be all for good, positive things.
Right, right. So the next item on our agenda is a social media policy review and a potential vote. Mr. Dwelly?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as we've discussed over the past few months, one of the board's goals is around communication and modernizing communication and ensuring that we are communicating effectively with residents. And so the town presently is using social media accounts in the police department as well as the Parks and Rec department. And what a lot of communities, a majority of communities are doing nowadays is they have a centralized official kind of town account that's used to be able to provide the community members with just things that are happening in the community, like today's MVP process, reminding people about agendas like the next board member. It's a great board meeting, excuse me. They're great tools to be able to push information out to the community. So I had created two test accounts, if you will, for the board that I've shared, that I've included, that I've started to populate with information on what those posts look like. But what's helpful before we start to really publicize those and leverage those is to implement a policy that really just outlines kind of how and why the community is using the social media policy. And this helps govern the overall process as we move forward. So included in your package tonight are a draft social media policy. This is the same social media policy that's used in the town of Acton, and it's for your consideration. And if the board so chooses to vote tonight, I'll get going on starting to promote and publish our social media accounts to be able to share information with the public.
So looking through the social media policy, in Acton, who enforces it? I mean, there's a lot of,
Yeah.
the frame, so I'm just, we're a very lean staff over here, so I'm,
Initiated.
The enforcement, these agreements are typically meaty, or I shouldn't say agreements, but these policies are typically meaty because, they want to cover a lot of situations if anything were to arise, right? For example, like how people respond or maybe not respond to messages. Who in the community is able to, or who on staff is actually able to post information and oversee our accounts. What do you do in situations if there is offensive content that's posted to our account? So it covers kind of anything that could potentially happen with social media accounts, but maybe perhaps the question was, Madam Chair, is who oversees the content, right? And who's publishing to these accounts, and
right, so
am I mistaken?
Right, so my concern is, I think in Dover, because there are private citizens getting information out on certain social media sites, there's a lot of back and forth comments and discussion. And I've seen that go bad too many times. Mm-hmm. And I believe citizens, many citizens, or a cross-section of our citizens are getting their information through social media. It's convenient for them to get the feed. Is there a way where you can not allow commentary to be made in these feeds?
Yeah.
So
you can turn off comments. You can adopt it as part of your policy if that's a concern. Absolutely. One of the things...
Because my concern is open meeting, violating, like members of a committee getting involved in a back and forth discussion. Yep. I personally think it's an excellent tool to get information out. Yep. I think some people go to the website, other people who get their information from social media sites, and then there's, in past instances, we've had citizens sign up for
push emails.
For push emails
Yeah.
if they're interested in a particular topic. So my biggest concern with social media is just the commentary that
Yeah.
goes back and forth.
So-
And I think that's difficult to control.
Sure, but so one of the things so in terms of who's pushing content out, the way the policy is drafted, it's the town administrator's office, right? It's controlled, the information that goes out is controlled by one person at this point as it's drafted. And so then that brings up the question is, do you want to allow comments on those posts? And so you should be mindful of, if people are leaving comments, that it's their name, they're identifying themselves, and if they choose to maybe say something inappropriate or offensive, that we have the appropriate disclaimers here that empowers me to be able to go and remove that comment. Alternatively, again, you could just turn comments off completely and just use it as a way to push information out.
But that would be different than how most people experience social media.
It would be, but I would, I'll give you a for instance. So in Yarmouth, when we rolled this out, there was concern, the board had the same concerns, right? Are people going to be commenting on our posts and disparaging people and writing offensive remarks? It did not happen in the 2 years that I was there, and I oversaw the communications. It did not happen once. What you found is that a majority of the comments that you would get would either be in support of a post, like, hey, this is great, like today's MVP, if we posted something about today's, which I did actually, event, great job. Or a lot of the questions that you actually get the comments you actually get are like follow-up questions. Using the MVP event as an example, someone could potentially comment and say, oh, how do I learn more about the MVP program? And so that's just one scenario, one instance in my experience where there was a concern about that. We put up a disclaimer to say that we would take down any offensive comments, but not once in my 2 years there did we ever have to do that.
I actually, the policy is pretty complex, and I'm going to come back. I really think this is sort of the cart before the horse. I really think that before we get down this particular path, that we really need to have a communications policy that covers how we intend to present a coherent, one government view of issues that government either has to respond to or wants to promulgate. And without that overall policy, this would be a piece of the policy. So I'm worried about that. I'm also worried about the fact that, for me, the more important priority, and we do have very limited resources, is to get the website converted to a different platform or to improve the website. And I think a lot of the communication from the town, as I understand Civic Plus, can be driven through the website. And so I'd like to start with a powerful, presentable government tool to communicate to the town. And I'd like to start with a way that using the website does a warnings and alert system that is coherent across the town. I mean, I think social media has a piece of solves a piece of the puzzle, but I really don't think that the time should be spent, your time in particular, should be spent on that right now. I said, my experience, we employed 3 professionals. Didn't employ. We had 3 volunteers on the Carroll Project Committee who were marketing professionals. And we didn't use them full-time, but we certainly used them, each of them part-time. And that was to manage one Facebook account and other social media outlets. And I just think that the amount of work involved in doing this properly is significant, and we ought to, make sure that this is the right application of resources, and that how we do this fits with how people are used to experiencing these types of things. And then lastly, both Facebook and Twitter are under tremendous scrutiny of their platforms and content, and they have clearly demonstrated their inability to manage that stuff. So if they can't do it, I have to approach this with some reservations. I think it just needs to be deferred.
Is there anything we can consider, take everything under consideration and we don't have to vote on any of the specific things tonight.
Exactly.
I think it's taken into
This requires
consideration.
more dialogue.
So I just need to say that this policy is in response to a couple of incidences that have occurred in the last
2 months.
2 or 3 months, where we have seen the negativity that's come about from social media accounts that are being managed by well-intended citizens of Dover to disseminate information that should be coming from the town, in my view.
Should be coming from the town, so.
Right.
Yes.
And that's why, I realize we need a bigger communication policy, but this is a start, and I would like, in my opinion, it is critical to stop the disinformation that's being disseminated on these social media
Right, so we have-
outlets.
we're working
And
on
I
it.
would like citizens to be able, because whether you like it or not, most people are connected to Facebook or Twitter. They get feeds, they get information.
We had
So,
200
and-
people on our
Right.
Facebook.
Right, and I got all my information from there, and I knew it was coming from, to lack of a better word, a trusted source.
Right.
And I think that's what we're trying to do here. Our website is cumbersome. I recognize we're changing it, but right now it's hard to get information on our website.
Yes,
So-
and it's been hard to get for a long time.
Right,
And it actually points to the scarcity of resources. And so, when we're talking about how to do this, to me, the resources should be devoted to putting, the one trusted source ought to be the website, and the content of the government ought to flow through the website. And I haven't gone through all of the functionality of the website, but it's, Tab is talking about it being fairly robust. The policy is fine, we should just defer it. We should make sure we have the right numbers. I said 3 people, professional people, doing the website for the Carroll project. And I just don't see that level of resource available right now in town to do that.
well, again, you make the decision of what you're gonna post, how often you're gonna post, and what's gonna be up there. So it could be, in my opinion, it can be as much or as little. But I agree with John, why don't we just noodle this a little bit more? I mean, Chris, you're one person, you're doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more, there's a lot on the plate.
And there's a lot more, in your experience, because you managed this.
I did.
Right, so how much time did it take?
Not much time at all.
So what kinds of information were being pushed out in Yarmouth on these feeds?
So for Board of Selectmen meetings, we had a nice template that we posted the agenda to remind people, hey, come to the board meeting, here's what the board's talking about. We did short videos to explain each article for town meeting. Each day, we did an article a day to provide people with information about what was on the warrant and just general things. Like, for example, so the MVP event today was a fantastic event, had a really great cross-section of community members, elected officials, Selectman Jeffries was there, and staff. And so I was in attendance, took 3 pictures of the event, posted it up on Twitter and Facebook, and said, hey, great community event, the town's undertaking an MVP process here. And now folks know, if they follow those accounts, oh wow, the town's doing this effort, and they know about it. If they want to find more information about it, now they can ask about it. But if they didn't have that resource or that medium to know that that occurred, they otherwise wouldn't. And social media is a great complement because it's really just for small, quick hits. Your website isn't really supposed to be a full news feed, right? It's core information about operating procedures and documents and hours. There's certainly a news section that rotates around, but social media is really kind of that feed for just kind of quick hits of what's going on in the community. And so other than having a phone to just snap pictures and, putting together that content, it was pretty seamless. I will say one of the things though that we wanted to do was that, to your point, Madam Chair, is, right, I'm only one person and the town is made up of, the town staff here are a diverse set of individuals, and they all have a diverse set of responsibilities. And, you know, I had that same mindset in Yarmouth, and so one of the things as I did is I started with control over the website to get us started, to build it, social media accounts. And then what I did is I worked with people in different departments to identify who was interested and who would be able to actually contribute content. So our conservation agent, for example, you know, when she was out doing things out in open space, she'd take a picture and say, hey, here's what we're doing down at this beach. And I did the same in the recreation department and in some of the other departments, and so that you have designated people in departments all contributing robust content to keep these feeds up to date and to give folks a sense on what's going on with the community. Another thing that, you know, just a quick point that I'd add, that social media, the city of Boston during my time there with the marathon bombings actually received national awards because at the time of crisis, their Twitter account was the only resource that people could get live information on where to go and to look for resources. And it was really the first big realization that, hey, these tools are a great way to instantly communicate with the public and provide real-time information. And that proved true in Yarmouth during the tornado that they experienced back in July, that immediately people were out there, these roads are closed, this is who you contact with the power outage, and it becomes a really great conduit for people to be able to find information. So those are my experience, but you know, I defer to the board on your preferred path forward.
So why don't we think about it a little bit more, and then we can take a vote on it at a later meeting.
Thank you for forwarding me, Kevin.
Yes, sir.
So, well, you have a busy night tonight. Sewage notification legislation. Well, this sounds fascinating.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
It's a 1-4.
We went through.
So the board was approached a few weeks back from the Mass River Alliance.
I sent you an email on this.
You did,
Right,
yeah.
I was asking about it.
Asking if the board would be interested in supporting legislation that's recently been filed up at the State House. The legislation requires that sewage operators provide instant notification to communities when they're discharging sewage as it relates to sewer overflow into rivers. And so this really came from, I imagine you read the difficulties that were occurring with the Merrimack River, with, I think it was Lowell and Lawrence, with some of the sewage plants up there, or actually when the rainwater gets so high, it either comes into your house or they release it and discharge it into rivers. And this, you know, this piece of legislation was in response to that. We're upriver from any of the Charles River discharge sites, but understanding the importance of water quality to all of us, this could be something that would be good to sign on if you're interested. I will note that Representative Garlick, while not an official sponsor of who issued the bill, she is one of the 80 or so supporting legislators of it.
Sounds like the right thing.
So what's the commitment if you sign up, you just get information?
Well, we don't sign up, we would
Okay.
just, you
Support.
could either empower me, or I can
Okay.
draft a letter and have the board sign it, and we would just send that letter to the State House saying that the Dover Board of Selectmen encourages the state legislature to pass this bill.
I like that.
I like
For us
that,
to sign,
right,
yeah.
right.
For us,
Sounds
yeah.
great, thank you.
Terrific. Okay.
Would you like to, do you mind taking a vote to that effect?
No, would very much mind.
Okay, so I would, there was no suggested motion, so now I
Yeah.
have to ad lib.
Uh-oh.
All right, so I make a motion to direct Mr. Dwelly to draft a letter for the Board of Selectmen to sign in support of the Massachusetts River Alliance.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
I like that.
All right, the next item is you as well, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
So the MAPC is our core
Right.
planning agency
Right.
that deals with regional issues here, everything from housing to transportation, to economic development. Each community as part of that conglomerate has a representative. Dover at present does not have
Who was it in the past?
one. I'm actually not sure. I defer that to Mona. Do you know? Was Dave on it? Okay. So typically, so they have a representative and they have an alternate. You could do one or the other. But these seats are typically filled by either a member of the Board of Selectmen and/or the town administrator, town manager.
How often is the meeting? How much time?
They detailed it in the letter here, but I want to say it's not an overwhelming commitment, but it's good to have a voice.
Once a quarter?
Truthfully, I'm not even sure if it'd be once a month. I think it'd be less than once a month.
Okay.
But if you'd like more detail before you make a decision, I can certainly track that down for
I've
you.
never done it. Have you ever done it? I think Dave always did it. Or we had a designated member. But I know none of us have ever done
So
it.
we can have a representative and an alternative representative?
Correct.
Right. Any volunteers?
I'd like to just know how much time, what the commitment would be and the number of meetings and see if it's something that we can commit to.
So then why don't we appoint the town administrator as the representative
John.
Yeah.
and then appoint an alternative?
Yeah.
And we could appoint you now, and if it's too much of a time commitment,
Sure.
then somebody else can do it. All
Lisa
right.
could do it.
So then I move to appoint Mr. Dwelly as a representative, or should we say town administrator?
Town administrator.
Town administrator,
yeah,
as a representative to the MAPC for a 3-year term effective October 30th, 2019. And then I move to appoint, how about I say just a member of the board?
Let me do the first
Well,
one.
I was going to do both, and then,
Together or apart?
can I do them together, or?
You
should
can
we vote
hold on
it?
voting on the alternate right now if you want.
No, I mean, could we do one motion for both appointments?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what I was thinking of doing is I move to appoint a member of the Board of Selectmen and not name that member. Could I do that? Because it's for a 3-year term and,
So we'd have to
Somebody-
identify, if you're
Okay.
thinking about, like, Madam Chair, you'd attend one meeting and then Selectman Jeffers would attend another. I think MAPC wants an
Okay.
official on
Okay.
file, yeah.
Okay, so then I move to appoint Mr. Jeffries as an alternate representative to MAPC Council for a 3-year term effective October 30th, 2019.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Because at some point in time, we will have an assistant town administrator.
Soon.
So,
So then we can modify that.
and we can modify that.
Right, well, we could also modify you as the,
I like that. What are your suggestions?
I'm already out.
no, well, we can modify John's
modify
appointment. No, your appointments.
John, you better watch out.
All right.
I've been modified.
So the next item
Improved Mona.
are updates. And the first item is the Carroll Community
Had
Center.
a great successful meeting on October 7th. We're
Right,
going to
but
move
I
on to
feel
phase
as though,
2.
but I feel as though we updated it,
We did.
the first agenda item.
Absolutely.
And the rail trail, we made an introduction to the Friends of the Dover Greenway, to the MBTA. And I haven't received an update from them as to whether or not they've been able to connect
So
with the
this will morph
MBTA.
into Carroll Building Committee or something.
Right.
Okay.
And now, item 1.6 is the town administrator update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very quickly, a couple of points. Operating budget guidance is out. Folks are undertaking now the process of developing out their operating budgets for fiscal year '21. So you should start I will be meeting with the Board of Selectmen departments as is practice to review their budgets, and then we'll present those to the board in December, which is the traditional timeframe for the board's review. Capital budget, just a quick update. I know there's a liaison, but I had a chance to check in with the chair this morning, and he mentioned that they're waiting on one other submission, and then he will give to me all the capital requests so that I can send those over to the board so that they can see
We
what's
could do it
been
in the
submitted.
spreadsheet format?
I can summarize it too.
Okay.
That's
I just wanted to make sure that the full board had that information. However,
no, they-
Oh, and
get that over there.
I'll
Yeah.
send it to you, and then you can
Yeah, it's really,
disseminate
it's a
everything.
pretty good tool.
Great. And then we talked about MVP today, and Selectman Jeffries might want to chat about this, but I just wanted to, thank the community. I wanted to thank Jerry Clark, the MAPC and the state for hosting. It was a really great event. It's a really good program, and I was very impressed with with just the sheer number of people and the diversity of people representing the community today, which made for a really, really great process.
So how many people attended?
About
Over
40.
Yeah.
Just about 50 members. 50 people attended. There were members from the state, there were members from various governing boards of these various bodies throughout the state. I was at the blue table. Lisa, you were at the red table, and so it was a really diverse set of stakeholders. There was lots of different opportunities to interact with the various members and to learn not only from their standpoint what the items that we should be considering are, but sort of many sides of the spectrum as it pertains to things that we should be thinking of, from solar array panels on hot spots that are visible and be able to map in our community. We only had in the town of Dover, we only had one hotspot, which is essentially the roof of the middle school and the high school.
Sure.
Because of tree cover and the parking lot. So you can think of that in two different ways. You could think of it as, should we add more green to the campus in terms of trees, or should we put solar panels on the roof? You could have a lively discussion as to what we should be thinking on just that one particular issue. We talked about the impact to open space, farmlands, water resources, the number of different solutions and the way towns have looked at their water issues, how we abut the Charles River, and there was really interesting breakout sessions. So Jerry Clark deserves huge thanks, and all of the people who have worked on our behalf. There were, as I said, and Lisa just commented, many different stakeholders throughout the community. Martin Pillsbury from, he's MSPC, right? Exceptional job. He facilitated the various breakout sessions and had his staff present as well. Thank you for your attendance. Chief McGowan and Chief Hughes were also at our table. So
And the town clerk attended as well.
There was a lot of town staff there
Right.
today.
There was a lot of department, our department heads and all of our department heads were present. So very.
Well, that's
Very
great,
good turnout.
because it could impact all different areas of the towns.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep. And then the next step is once our plan is certified and we become an official MVP community, that opens up grant funding, very much like the Green Communities designation we have, so that we can help pay for some of the projects that are, critically important here in the community, which is a good thing.
So I'd like to echo John's thought. I couldn't make the meeting today, and it was a lot of time spent by a lot of people, and we are very, very lucky to have people who can step up and volunteer and are interested in the community. Thank you all very much, and thanks, Jerry, for putting it all together. Just a tremendous effort. And I was bouncing around town, and anybody I walked into who I thought might have gone to the meeting, I asked them how it was, and it was positive across the board. That's a big deal. Thank you.
I think we owe Mr. Clark a thank you for the menu as well. I heard some.
Oh, yes, yeah. How can you forget the menu?
And the amount of food that's all I heard about, so.
At TAB, he was trying to entice me with a free lunch.
Oh, exactly.
I was booked today.
It was his, definitely, it's the way he got people here.
Yeah,
But
and we get a lot of that food locally as well, which is a good
that's
thing.
great, right?
That's great.
Support Dover business.
Right.
And then
Very
just
well done.
the last quick update, since the assistant was mentioned. So the panel of individuals who are reviewing candidates and will interview all the candidates until we get to a finalist has gone through all of our applicants. We've identified over a dozen individuals that we're going to bring in for initial brief interviews to get a better sense of their interest in the position, the qualifications that they bring. So those interviews will begin the week of November 11th.
It's Veterans Day.
Yeah, that's right.
Technically the 12th, but it's,
Who was the caterer for today?
oh gosh,
Oh,
John,
I
I
see.
know, so it was Dover Deli, and then,
Blue Moon.
oh,
Material.
Blue Moon over Medfield, okay, yeah.
Okay.
I love blue.
So I have a couple of items I'd like to just put on, talk about. So retrofit is owing us this is from the TAB meeting yesterday. So retrofit is owing us a product, and I don't know where they are, and it would be nice to sort of understand where they are and when they're going to deliver.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, and then the website, they talked about that they're sort of still scratching their head about why the load is so long. And I don't know if it's something that we should be addressing, or if we should be addressing how we would address it. Because it's not the job of the TAB to be doing detail programming on the website. Civic Plus got good reviews at the TAB, and then we had a series of discussions about what the next steps are with Civic Plus, and I think they're in the minutes. But essentially, there was a discussion about should we do version A or version B, which is the simpler or more complex. There was a tendency to go for the more complex. There was a due diligence step that the committee thought about taking. So basically, contacting other communities using either version A or version B, and having them opine on their experience with the products, and all this. And then and so that was sort of the thrust. We like Civic Plus. We wanted to do a little bit deeper dive, make sure that all the questions of the committees are known and asked and answered, and then decide whether or not they would recommend proceeding with Civic Plus. And then there were two other things that I heard about that I don't know if the board is fully aware, and I just want to use this opportunity to say there is a fair amount of concern about a plan by the regional school to change the start hours of the middle school, high school, and Chickering. And I was approached yesterday by a person who wanted to know how you get a citizens warrant article on the ballot, on the warrant for the next town meeting. And so there's some confusion about who does what to whom, and we may need to sort of help either monitor or educate about how this stuff goes forward. You guys know about that?
I do.
Okay.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
been extensive meetings about it. They've reached out to many parents. There's a vocal minority, from what I understand. We could ask the school committee, a member of the school committee, or perhaps the superintendent to
Maybe both.
come, or both, to come and talk to us about it. From what I know is there was a subcommittee of the school committee that was set up, who's been looking at this for over a year, and
This goes back.
it goes back. So it would probably be a good idea to ask Dr. Kehoe to attend with, members of his staff and members of the school
Yeah,
committee.
I don't
that
know,
were part
I'm the
of it.
chair of the Chickering School Committee, is that?
Well, it impacts both Chickering
does.
and Dover,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it impacts
Yeah.
both communities.
So does anybody know why we couldn't just do one pickup time?
We
Buses,
don't have enough buses.
buses.
But Bob, all these questions have been asked,
Okay.
and all these questions have
Again,
been
it was more like-
addressed.
I sort of
So
got-
we should ask the
I
superintendent
will
to
work
come
with the
and give an
superintendent to get them on the agenda to come and
Right,
share with the
right.
board.
Okay, so it's just, like I said, I hadn't heard.
Well, there was actually, at Dover Days, there was a booth set up, and there was a lot of information that was disseminated on what had been done, and how the recommendation came to fruition.
Okay. I
And
was
then
away,
there
so I
were,
didn't hear all that.
right, and then there was also a
rubbing it.
tent set up with those opposing it. So
Right,
we
okay.
have the pro,
So
it's
Right, so-
democracy at its best.
No, that's okay. I mean,
Standing
it's-
right
it's
next
just-
to each other.
It's just, I didn't know if the
Right.
board was aware, and I
Oh,
wanted to
yeah.
raise the issue, just to make sure. Then lastly, when I got back from holiday, I was invited to a meeting on Haven Meadows, the Haven Terrace proposed development. And I met with a group on Sunday night, went over, was just listened to.
So they're meeting with all of us individually,
I think so.
right?
yes.
And I
I
had.
think I was first. It was
Right,
first.
and, you know, when they approached me, I said, all I can do is listen. The board has to make a decision, so
Right.
I'm not gonna say anything. I'm happy to listen to your concerns.
Okay, so as part of, after the meeting, and I listened to the issues that were presented, I said, you know, my first step would be to talk to the chairman of the planning board, and I did that today. And it just occurred to me that, I mean, like always, you have this sort of a set of people who are maybe misinformed a little bit, and interested in their
Well, it's their
events in their
neighborhood.
neighborhood. And talking to the chair of the planning board, and asked a little history, and she had just come from a meeting with our council, and had really laid out, you know, what they can and can't do, what the exceptions are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a very thorough review that we had, and it was just sort of luck. And I suggested they may want to think about, they being the planning board, holding a forum to have that kind of discussion where council sort of discusses what can and can't be done, to try to at least dispel some of the misconceptions. And I said I would mention this tonight to my colleagues, just, you know, so they know and they can think about it, and you know, see if we might want to participate or not, just to try to, you know, keep the temperature low and people focused on what's possible. And that's it for me.
So one of the things we had talked about, Chris, before you got here, and we never quite were able to pull the trigger, is maybe having at each meeting, a rotating chair of the different committees come in and just provide us with a 10-minute update of what they're working on and what, just so that we can keep everybody informed.
Sure.
So I don't know if that's something you would like Chris to start.
Oh,
But,
absolutely.
you know, again, it's, like if the planning board can just, the chair could come, and really, we don't need more than 10 minutes or 15 minutes. They could just give us a summary of items that they are working on or that have come up in the past quarter.
Sorry, so now you gave me something else.
Okay?
In the recesses of my mind, somewhere, either right before or right after the October 7th town meeting, I bumped into the superintendent of schools. And I said to him, Andrew, do you have any time to come to one of the selectmen's meetings and tell us about what's going on at the region? And
Well, he's gonna come and tell us about the sleeps.
and it wasn't this. And he said that, you know, a good time for him to come would be in January. And he could give us sort of a broad overview of sort of
State of the
plans,
Union.
goals. Yeah, State of the Union. So did I mention that at any point in time?
You did now.
Consider it mentioned.
So I thought that was a very gracious offer, and I really want to take it up on that.
Would you like answers, Selectman Spring, to the first two?
Sorry.
I think you had two items that were posed as questions, retrofitting the website, or were those statements?
No, they were just follow-ups from the tab.
Okay.
Right, that was, so you know, you couldn't make the meeting, so I just wanted to sort of brief the committee as well as you.
So does it make sense on the selectmen's updates, just to add the tab, and then we could give updates on what's
Okay.
going on at the
Well,
tab?
the selectmen updates don't necessarily need to be, the agenda doesn't necessarily need to reflect what it is you want to talk about. The
Okay.
chair typically will just call on a member, and if there's anything that they want to ask or discuss, they
I
can
like
do so.
that, okay.
So I do have a couple, I realized for my vacation, all I was doing was thinking about all the questions I could ask tonight, because I knew you
So
wanted.
are you done yet?
No, I have more. So,
3-week vacation. He's been
So
saving these for.
These are just things that, from my mind, we haven't really finished. So one was the issue about free cash that John spearheaded last.
I have an update for you on that.
Okay, so that's one thing. We have this Dover Unplugged event coming up the 5th.
Yep.
And so in one of the notes I saw, how do we do taxes? And I'm not sure, how does the tax process, assessment, tax rate setting? So I didn't know if there was any prep work being done for this meeting, or if we're just gonna ad lib.
Well, Chris and I had gone back and forth with George, and jump in, Chris, and we had asked that we had suggested doing it later so that we could prepare and have it more of a formal event, and he wanted it to be very informal. So
is ad lib.
it's ad lib, like he wanted us just to say what our roles are on the Board of Selectmen and what we, the various things we're working on.
Okay, and then I was talking with.
Because
Chris on-
we had many conversations.
Right, so there was a whole slew of emails.
Yeah, it was,
And there were verbal conversations as well.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The,
No, go ahead before
I
he
just
asks
wanted to
another
reiterate that
question.
it was relayed to me that it was more of just a conversation. So
That's
the
fine.
agenda, I didn't anticipate an agenda with detailed questions to
Yeah, no.
come, but if there's anything the board needs, let me know. I will also be in attendance
We'll just
with
defer to
on
you.
the-
Yeah.
on the 7th, so.
Good idea.
All the hard questions, we'll say, ask Chris.
We're a flak jacket.
Yeah, but to the question
So we're-
of
so
how
we're
do we do
covered.
taxes, that's a lot more than a casual response.
Exactly right.
So typically what happens is when someone asks for a casual response and you give them half a page of detail, they were actually looking for 2 pages of
Yep.
detail.
Well, I think what you need to say for those questions is the Board of Selectmen is planning to do a Citizens Academy. And
Yeah.
at the academy, we will have workshops that will explain these things. Preparing for the academy is a lot more involved than this evening. This evening is just a really high-level overview of how the town runs.
Yeah.
And we hope that we will whet your appetite and you will be in attendance at our Citizens Academy
And we'll
when
cure
we
insomnia as well.
when we start enrolling.
Yes.
It's a good,
But, yes, in fact, to the answer to your first question with regards to free cash and updating the free cash process, which has been off the agenda for
Right,
a few
right,
months while
right.
we've
Well,
been
we're gonna
going
put it
through
back on.
Back on. So Q1 FY 2020,
yeah.
we will get our first results in December. So Jerry and I and Amy have had several conversations about taking the first quarter results, being able to project how we actually, where we are, where we think we are going based upon these projections and what we anticipate our needs will be. And then reporting back sometime in probably the first meeting in December of what those results are today. So to answer your question, we will have our first preliminary report back
That'd be great.
from everything, once we have essentially the first round of data of the first quarter results.
And then I was talking with Chris on Friday when we got back, and we were talking about, I was mentioning that I thought that as we got into building Carroll, that particular thing, I thought there'll be questions about space requirements for the townhouse. I think Chris said they were correlated, and I think, yes, they're correlated. And so when I went in and was speaking with him, I was said, should we be considering sort of renovating the townhouse? Should we get on-site insight in here to do the review? Because I know we had put money in the kitty for that. And so we need to, at least from my perspective, we need to sort of think about this in tandem. The renovation of Carroll or a new building and what we need from a town point of view in terms of public workspace in this building. And I think those things will be correlated, if not linked more closely as we get into that project. And so I just raised this so you guys can think about it.
Well, the other thing we should think about if we're doing a brain dump is, should we be thinking about how to run the Carroll Community Center, begin to change the way it's run right now, so that will then be an easier transition when we have a new facility, whether it's renovated or, because I think we need to think about a more efficient way of.
So you think the building committee's work and what their
Would be
recommendation
part
is
of
on
that.
what the future usage of Carroll
That
will
would
likely
tie
drive
into-
what the needs
okay.
are for
No,
that?
that's a good point.
There were some similarities that had come up in the process. For example, part of that building, as we all know by now, is used for storage. Part of this building is used for storage. Is that the best use of that space? And that is something I think that we've talked about already that can translate, just as you described. That conversation and that process that we utilize for Carroll is going to translate very well here. Because if we come to the realization that space across the street is not utilized by storage very well, we'll probably come to the same conclusion here in this building and have a pretty simple set of ways to address that issue for this building that we address for that building.
Will we need temporary space at Carroll?
Well, that will come out of the feasibility study.
Well, we have to think about it, right? It's really
Sure.
beyond-
But
Regardless
They're
of
not going to
which,
tell us, we're going to tell them.
regardless of which way we
They're
go.
going to pull everything together, and the outcome is going to be, and for this building, I think you need to think about how, as you modernize, how processes may change, and, does it make sense the way staff is so separated? I mean, there are going to be a lot of decisions that,
Right. So
so I'd rather not jump into everything, but sort of
It just, again, this is
let it
just
evolve.
things off. And in terms of CMAC, then I did, after the town meeting, I did have coffee with Kathy Weld, and she asked me sort of, for my thoughts on how the thing should run going forward. And I did lay out 3, 4, 5, I think 4 sort of threads that I thought the CMAC should consider as sort of their mission statement over the next couple of years. And one of them was to begin to think about how they might begin to move the management structure, as Robin pointed out, to one more consistent with how other community centers work. And then I also thought, genre, that they should be, I think they should be experimenting with programs. Right now the programs result from COA and from Park and Rec, and we have renters and licensees in the building. So to a certain extent, we have sort of things for younger people and things for older people, but we don't have things for the people in between. And we might be able to create new programs or workspaces for people in town to bring in more rental income, as well as begin to model what other community centers do. So it really can be an opportunity to get our ducks in a row, see what works as we go through this, what could be a 1, 3, 4, 5-year process.
But a lot of that's going to come out of the building committee, right, Chris? Right, and the subcommittees that come out of the building committee, because you're gonna be doing a deeper dive, in my opinion, is my thought into what, what programs are gonna be offered in that building, what people want.
I think also,
So I think it all comes together.
one of the things that Mark told us in Park and Rec was a lot of the programs that are targeted to that middle group are targeted to, are programs that happen outside of the building. So tennis, soccer, lacrosse, all the things that happen in the fields that Park and Rec is a big part of, for that particular age group, don't necessarily happen at the building. So there's a big constituency that's served from Park and Rec through that building,
Right,
but
Right,
they
so-
don't have the actual services at the building, or the facility at the building. They're not utilizing the facility for the service.
So we don't really have on the agenda
No.
a discussion about the future of the Carroll Community Center, so,
It's just random thoughts.
right, so I think we should
Actually, not random.
No.
move on to the items on our agenda, and now we have the
That's
consent.
a good thing, 'cause I finished.
Right. The consent agenda, so we have some special licenses. Well, we actually only have one special license to approve, and we have the open session meeting minutes for September 19th and the 26th, and October 3rd and the 17th, and executive session meeting minutes from September 5th and October 3rd, and a vote to close at noon the day before Thanksgiving.
Okay, so I have one question. I was not at the meeting of October 17th.
John and I were here.
Right, so I can't, I don't think I should recuse myself from approving the minutes since I don't have no knowledge of what was.
So I was told once that even though you're not at the meetings, you can still
can
vote
still
on the
vote.
minutes, right? You don't recuse yourself,
Yeah.
because I
Okay.
thought I was gonna. So then I would move to approve the consent agenda as presented and hold the executive session minutes of September 5th to be released at a later date.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And there being no further business, I make a motion to adjourn this evening's meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.